podcast where stories aren't just told, they're felt, questioned, and remembered. Listeners, I'm your host Sana, and today's episode isn't another conversation about cold plunges, kale, or chasing that elusive balance. It is a raw, necessary frame around health and wellness, especially in the midlife. Now, listeners, my guest is a registered nurse turned holistic women's wellness coach. But more than that, she's a woman who has lived the burnout, the identity crisis, the hormonal chaos, and the silent ache of being told you are just not coping. She's turned those lived experiences into Eternal Her, which is a movement that merges science with spirit and invites women to slow down, soften, and come home to themselves. So, if you have ever felt like you are doing all the right things and still feel off, unseen, or overstretched, this episode is for you. So let's quickly begin, not with fixing, but with remembering. So, Sharon, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really excited to have you here with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Sienna. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I love what you're trying to do and the message that you're putting out to your listeners. So I think it's fabulous to be part of that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sharon. So Sharon, to begin with, uh, you know, now we are beginning to talk about how all the systems, how are the different components here, the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual health, they are connected. But then I think the discussion, the conversation around nervous um system is yet to be, yet to come into the mainstream. So
Mm.
how exactly do you believe that nervous system is like one of the most crucial aspect of our health and emotions? I mean, we talk about digestive system and everything there.
Yeah, well, it's so huge. Like I think like to be very honest, I suppose, and to just sort of so your listeners can understand, I come from an environment where I've worked for over 30 years as a senior clinician in acute hospital settings in Australia.
Mhm.
And the other thing that I've kind of done, so I'm in my mid 50s myself, but have always been, back from my 20s, been very active, even probably my late teens, where I was active very, physically, certainly lived through the Jane Fonda seasons and all of that sort of thing, and into now still going to the gym. But I think interestingly, the biggest breakthrough I've kinda had was in relation to my own nervous system and, um, actually now seeing people who are presenting to the emergency department and women in particular, I guess, who are presenting with other clinical issues like maybe a diverticulitis. We sort of certainly see a lot of women who present with appendicitis still. They're presenting with cholecystitis. And although your appendicitis and cholecystitis isn't necessarily indicative of anything within your system, I do think that your nervous system sits as that. I guess it's a bit like the underground of our bodies. And I completely agree with you that it's not in the mainstream at all in relation to healthcare and looking at the increasing rates of anxiety, depression, the overwhelm, the frustrations, and the disconnection that I think a lot of women are now struggling with. And the fact that we tend to, I guess, if you're in within medical, the medical model, it's kind of either that you're kind of diagnosed with a condition, a disease, and then it's seen that you are kind of given medication, for instance, and there's no sort of psychological support or there's no add-on support from a lifestyle perspective, or if you go the other way where, you can go into your Ayurvedas and your yogas and all of that side, which I think is essential as well, but
Mhm.
they kind of then don't also link back into the Western medicine. So I felt, and I have done all of my life, really didn't understand how, to me, the optimistic healthcare would be the combination of the both. And that we're actually trying to educate people to sort of say, okay, well, this is my body and what do I need to do about it? So, and I'm sort of finding in the hospital system now, particularly, that people either go one way or the other. And I don't necessarily think that that's the right solution either, because they don't have an avenue of combination. So does that kind of helps, I suppose, with your answer, your question?
Absolutely, Sharon. Absolutely. And one particular statement, which I loved is, it's my body, and I should know what's with it, and it's really empowering, and sometimes it really gives you that ownership within you that, I mean, it's your body. You should know uh
Yeah.
what is happening with it.
Yeah, I think the problem that we've had is I think we've all grown up um, probably dependent on someone else telling us what the answers are. Um, and that's really not anyone's fault. That's just kind of how things have occurred. And yet, I think women are incredibly intuitive into what's wrong. But I think that the problem has been that, like I said, they fall into, one camp or the other. And so it becomes a bit tricky to then navigate through. And I think my own experience was that certainly, I'm a healthy human. I don't have any sort of chronic disease, but I had lived through sort of a very difficult marriage and then a equally difficult divorce. And I kind of actually had got to a point where I was like in crisis mode. So I was constantly, they talk about, you're in fight and flight, you're surviving, you're not thriving by any means. And I actually kind of got to a point where I was like screaming at the ceiling, just saying, I've had enough. I can't do this anymore. And for someone who feels that they, have a handle on their own health, who can navigate the situation and feels like I'd sort of been ahead. I think my nervous system was just completely overwhelmed, but I just didn't really know what to do. And I did go to the doctor and, she offered me some tablets and all of that sort of thing, but she didn't really spend time as to why. She just acknowledged that I'd been through this traumatic time, that, I was also trying to do my master's in nurse practitioner at the time, and I was trying to do a lot of things and look after my children and work full time. And, excuse me, and I think anyone who would probably reflect on that, they would kind of go, well, yeah, it is too much. But I think a lot of people will say, but that's kind of my life. That's what I'm doing. And it wasn't until I kinda got to that point and listening to finally going, "You know what? Like, I think there is something so much better, and I think I actually know what the answer is," but I had just never given myself the time or the space to allow my head to actually make that decision. Um, and then I kind of did some restorative yoga training, and that's when I realized myself that my nervous system had tightened my body down so much, and I had quite a visceral physical response to a process that I went through, that I myself started to sort of see things that I had never seen before, and the cage that people talk about, and that feeling like I'm this bird that everyone's looking at, but everyone else is holding the key and I'm not holding the key, that kind of scenario. And so that made me realize, and kind of, that even though I wasn't unwell with chronic disease, I certainly wasn't getting any better with my coughs and colds. It was certainly around the time of COVID, and despite having multiple vaccinations and working in the hospital and everything, I still did get sick. And I kind of just thought, this is not okay, like, And I could see that I was not alone in this, and I could see it reflective within our hospital population. And that's when I sort of had just decided that I think that the eternal her and what I'm trying to talk to is really to empower women to say, you know what you need. You just need to be able to have the conversation with multiple people to find out what that recipe is for your nervous system. And the only way to do that is to really give yourself that space and that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you on that. And Sharon, we often hear phrases like nervous system dysregulation, I mean, tossed around online, but what does it actually mean in lived experience?
Yeah. So I guess your nervous system, like from a clinical perspective, I guess if you look at the physiology of our nervous system, it certainly empowers our vital organs, sort of thing. Part of your nervous system is that fight and flight, which is your sys- symptomatic. No, it's not symptomatic. It's your sympathetic. And that's kind of where people and that's where your cortisol is, that's where all of your insulin sits. It's all to do with, um, providing energy to your body in order for you to function. So, and then you have a parasympathetic system, which is the one that kind of doesn't actually naturally kick in. It's the one where now they talk about how we need to actively promote the parasympathetic nervous system to kick back into our systems, which has all got the oxytocin, the dopamines, and it's all the feel good sort of hormones, all those hormones that actually make us feel secure and feel safe. And what this now nervous system dysregulation is being spoken about is really about the fact that women in particular are probably chronically now in a sympathetic drive because of the fact that our lives are quite busy. They're very dynamic. There's lots and lots of multitasking that goes on through the day. And then, particularly when you come home at night, you're continually multitasking with your family and whatever else you're trying to organize within your life. So, the thing is, and then we're sort of still on our devices at the end of the day, and we're sort of trying to go to sleep at night, but our bodies haven't recognized that we're needing to rest. And so your body essentially is probably not actually going to sleep correctly. And then we start the cycle again. And so part of all of that is then you've got the cortisol overdrive, you have insulin resistance because we're constantly fueling our system with sugar to try and keep us going. And then the body's saying, I've got too much and I don't know what to do with the rest of it, which is why we then start to store fat. So the parasympathetic nervous system is the thing that we've actually now got to start to talk to actively ourselves with the actions that we give ourselves. So it's again, it's this space and it's the time, it's the connection to ourselves again, and it's the grounding techniques, it's the, ability to even just start with 5 or 10 minutes, even if you've got a crazy life and you think, "Oh, I can't even slow my head down," you kinda go, "Okay, I'm just gonna do this for 5 minutes," that's all you need to do, and what happens is your body actually starts to get to a point where it will actually start to feel relaxed, and so it's very interesting when you've worked through it because once you get to that point, it's a bit like an aha moment where you kind of think, "Oh my goodness, like I have not felt like this for years." And that's where the healing actually starts to happen. It's sort of almost in that rest mode. And that's really what we've got to try and get our bodies into before we go to bed. But that's kind of the new reasoning behind the trying to re-regulate our systems, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And that's beautifully described, Sharon. I'm very sure that aha moment, it must have been for you as well. I mean, what did it feel like in your body? If you may. Share.
Oh, yes. Well, I keep having aha moments because I feel like I get deeper and deeper. So this is absolutely a personal journey that I think I've now really come to understand is lifelong. So the difference now that happens, I think, is that when I kind of worked through the initial breakthrough that I had, I was very caught up in the why do I feel like this? Why do I feel like a caged bird? I visualized this, rusted cage. And and it was literally like a bird cage, but I was in it, so it must have been bigger, obviously. But it was kind of one of those things where, people were holding like the old-fashioned key, like that's how clear the picture was in my head, and I could smell pink roses. That was the other thing that I was very, very fragrant for me was these pink roses. And so when I was then talking about it, like the teacher kept saying to me, "Don't judge, don't." And I'm like, "Why is this person doing this? And why is it?" And I was still obviously very external in my rationale or my trying to calm, and that's part of those barriers, these internal armoring that we talk about as well.
Mhm.
And over the time, like I've just done a yoga retreat in Bali myself, and I think it's actually something that I really want to kind of get into more so because I found, the more you do work around expanding your heart space and expanding, and sitting with that feeling of tightness in your chest, you actually start to see, or I can see and visualize different sensations. And when I start to move through that now and I breathe and I make sure, trying to I place myself in an environment where I feel comfortable. Um, and it's a message that I'm now sending mentally to my body to say, you're safe. And, you can feel this and you just need to open yourself up to this and it's okay. And I think the constant message of compassion and non-judgment is very important. Coming from someone who's, I've always worked and been highly professional. I've pushed myself. I've worked in critical care environments of intensive care emergency. So the environment, it's naturally that you've got to learn lots of things and your medical knowledge is very high and there's an expectation of a team and things like that. So the judgment kind of, even though I've been an educator, was always, am I good enough? Am I providing enough? Am I looking after my patients enough? Am I doing enough, enough, enough? And it kind of translates to your family as well because you want to be, everything to everybody. And again, that's the people pleaser as well. But I think that learning to be compassionate and non-judgmental, and now I feel I have these moments where I know, like I did this morning, where I just walked down. I've got a couple of broken bones at the moment from a hike I did. And so I've got a broken ankle and a broken finger. But I was in my moon boot and I just sort of walked down locally to a park near me. I bought my coffee and I could just sit and I now know if I'm in the outdoors in the space, I can now feel like comfortable and I can feel my system settle with my breathing. And I'm getting better at home. Like it is certainly something that I will be, very honest about that if I've had a very busy day and my head is busy or I'm getting really excited about different opportunities and I want to say a lot of things, um, I do find that I kind of, it does, I struggle a little bit to slow my mind down a bit. And I think that that's where I've really become very conscious of writing everything out at the end of the day. Like if I just have 1,000 jobs in my mind, I just make sure that there's a pen and paper beside my bed and I just write it all down. And then, as part of my resting to go to bed, I just make sure I'm off my device at least, that hour before you go to sleep. And then I try and read. So, whether it's a page or 3 pages, I now find that that's another way for my body to sort of go, you know what, it's time for sleep. And I'm actually now sleeping much better during the night. I wake up refreshed. I feel so much better and I feel like I'm now sort of particularly for this business, I've got so many ideas that I just sort of wake up in the morning and I'm like, "Okay, this has just come to my head," and I go and write it down so I don't forget about it. But I kind of just feel that that vice that I have felt is lessening, and but it just takes time.
It takes time. It takes time, but it's and whatever you just said, they are all, they're all somehow connected to mindfulness. That how you are able to feel the feelings, the sensations, the vibrations in your body, the communication, between your mind and the body, and then you're also, uh you know the good old ways, uh writing down, uh clearing your mind.
Yeah.
I love that writing helps a lot. I mean,
Yes.
it's uh, I mean, I have had so many conversations where, just writing down, if your mind is feeling cluttered, you are feeling like a bit frustrated, writing down maybe how you can plan your day or what's exactly going on in your mind or something like that. It really
Mm.
a lot, and that too, pen and paper. But
Yes.
we are deep down into the age of technology and AI and stuff, but I am still a huge advocate of pen and paper or pencil.
Oh, me too. I've got pieces of paper everywhere. But I think the other thing too is, even and I know I have these conversations, and even I've felt that, like when you say when you just said, you're feeling frustrated and you write it down. When you think about that frustration, that's an emotion that will sit in your nervous system. Um, that if you're not releasing that, then stays there. You almost rewire your infrastructure and your cells, how your cells vibe and all of that sort of thing. So the writing in itself is almost, could be deemed as one of those ways that you're healing your nervous system because you actually just release it then, like it's a way of. Right. I certainly know I journaled a lot through my divorce and that sort of thing. And I'm pretty sure if anyone read my diaries, I would be like going back and saying the same thing. But I think that the thing is, at least it wasn't rolling around in my mind over and over again, even though it probably was. But it's kind of like you say, you put it down, you write it in your terms, like it's just for you, and I love the pen and paper because it's kind of like in your writing with, your favorite pen almost as well, and if you made it like a specific ritual that you did do, you could have these beautiful journals, that are around, that you could write and then process through. But I think the other thing is too, it's also good to just have like loose, like a pad that you can just write, and then you can just write down a whole bunch of jobs, that you sort of ticking away. You might have a kid going to camp and you've got to pack a sleeping bag, but then you're like, "But I've got to wash the sleeping bag, and then I've got to put it out, and then I've got to get this." And then like there's 12 jobs attached to the sleeping bag. And then you kind of think if you wrote it all down and then you put it on a piece of paper, then you can just tick it all off, and then you just crumple it up in a big ball and throw it in the bin and it's done. So there's so many ways of, I think, the beauty of writing and just getting it out of your head, I think is so much healthier for us.
Mm, absolutely. And Sharon, before we wrap up, this conversation, it leans into softness, into slowing down. Um, but what would you say to someone listening who feels like they don't have that privilege, that time to regulate? That kind of, what all we are talking about, this
Yeah. Yeah.
luxury they can't afford right now.
Look, I think that if someone is saying that, I feel that they are in particular the one that needs to find that space. And really, it's only something that you need to do. Like I started doing this like once a week. I wasn't doing it on a regular basis by any means. And I actually started to kind of do it on the weekend. So, depending on how your week runs, I just found that my Saturday morning was a time that, everybody kind of was settled and I didn't have to go to work and all of that kind of thing. And so I actually started to just go for a walk down the road and do exactly what I did this morning. Or I go for a walk and, I put a podcast on and then I would have my coffee. And what I found, I think that, like whatever it is that I think naturally makes someone feel good or is that luxury that they have in their life, is something that they should pull into this little ritual. But honestly, it doesn't need to be that long. It can be literally 5 minutes where you take your shoes off and walk on some grass and take, 5 deep breaths. And that in itself will be enough to start to switch your system. And that I could guarantee you, when you put your shoes back on, you would feel better.
Mm.
So it doesn't need to be hard, and I think, the more that the busier you are, I think it's more important that you do that, because when you're really busy, you're trying to do a lot and you probably, in that forced mode. So you're pushing all the time rather than just allowing to be, which is where that softness comes in and that space. So I think, and women, I think, unfortunately, we've kind of grown up in a generation where, um, we are trying to prove a lot of things, and I think we're trying to prove it to ourselves, but it has become, the difference between my mother and myself is quite different in the generational rationale of how I enjoy my day and whether, I should be doing XYZ at certain times of the day. And so I think that that's, even if you've had a really busy day and you know that you've got to come home with the kids and all the rest of it, um, I just think if you gave yourself 5 minutes to walk outside, even if you don't take your shoes off, like if you literally walk outside and can watch the sunset, that moment of connecting with something outside of your home and all that sort of thing allows you to connect to the earth, to Mother Earth, to the universe, the planet, which is where we then gain that positive, electrical charge that we need.
I couldn't agree more with you. Wow. So, Sharon, before we wrap up, if our listeners they would like to connect with you, and explore more about Eternal Her, what would be the best way?
Well, they certainly could connect through social media. So, Eternal Her, as it is known, is I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I certainly have a website which is www.eternalher.com, and that in itself sort of has, different offerings on there. I have a blog on there that I think is something, I love people to subscribe to that, because it's free. It often is reflective of kind of what I'm going through at the time, but it's also written. Sometimes I'll write it from a perspective of, physiology and, 5 things to do, which I did do one in relation to mindfulness just recently, which is very helpful. And it was sort of just that 5 minutes. So it's again the conversation. So that just reinforces it. So that's in my blog. But otherwise, yeah, I would just love them to, like, even, if they connected through social media and DM'd me, I'm very happy to have a chat.
I'll make sure to have all the links and details in the show notes, Sharon, for our listeners. And thank you so much. Um, because so often we treat healing like a checklist, supplements, detoxifications, this, that. But I believe the most radical form of wellness is first, it invites honoring your pace, um,
Mhm.
self acceptance and awareness of listening to your body, and then also unlearning the noise, the chaos that says that you have to just always push your way to health. I think that's
Yes.
something we discussed today on this, and through your lived experiences, we got to know about that. So thank you so much for throwing light on this, Sharon, and sharing your journey, your insights, and so such a beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I do hope I'm very happy. If anyone is listening and they want have more questions, I love to have the conversation. I just think it's really important, and it's almost, I think it's our new, I think it's potentially a new way of healthcare. We just need to sort of, I need more voices saying the same things.
Absolutely. So, to all the listeners out there, today's conversation reminded us that nervous system health isn't a trend, it is the foundation. It is your body, and you should know about it. And in the slowing down, in the choosing of ourselves, in the gentle act of softening, we begin to return home. So, if today's conversation stirs something in you, take a moment to breathe, let it land, and maybe let it change how you care for yourself today. Until next time, this is the Mindful Living podcast, and I'm your host, Sana, asking you to stay curious, stay soft, and stay rooted. Thank you.